Okay, we're live. All right, thanks everybody for joining us today in our Open Agriculture Learning Series. This week we're going to be hearing from Sarah Bowman at the Center for Open Science. She's going to talk a little bit about their work and the tools that they're developing. If you're new to the series, we're trying to gather as many different people who are working on developing open source tools, be they software tools or hardware tools for farmers, and trying to kind of get them in the same space so we can find points of collaboration and move forward from there. So my name is Daniel Kane. I work for Michigan State University. And with that, we're going to do a few more introductions. Dorn?
Sure. Dorn Cox with Green Start in New Hampshire, a farmer myself, and also the president of FarmHack.
All right. Abe?
I'm Abe Collins with Collins Grazing and Landstream, the Grass-Fed Exchange, and the Soil Carbon Coalition.
Great. And Peter?
Yeah, Peter Donovan with the Soil Carbon Coalition, and our principal project is the Soil Carbon Challenge, which uses time series measurements and open, transparent data.
Fantastic. Great. All right, so I think most of us, aside from Sarah, are going to turn off our mics and our video feeds. And at some points, I may also turn off different folks just so that make sure we're able to hear each other well enough. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Sarah.
Great. Thanks. So I'm Sarah Bowman. I am a project manager at the Center for Open Science, and we are a nonprofit tech startup. We're based out of Charlottesville, Virginia, and we have the mission of increasing the openness, integrity, and reproducibility of scientific research. We've been around for about 2 years now, just over 2 years, and we have about 32 full-time employees and about 25 interns who all started yesterday. So it's been an interesting week. Our staff are software developers. We're really interested in building free and open source tools to help researchers manage their research workflow and store and share their data and materials. All of this to help us meet our mission of increasing openness, integrity, and reproducibility of scientific research. So a lot of what we do is build open source tools. On the other side of things, we also do work with community groups, journal editors, individual researchers, funders, people that are stakeholders in scientific research and who have a vested interest in reproducibility of science. So we work with community groups to do statistical training, writing author guidelines for journals to enhance policies around transparency in research, number of different community efforts. So I work mostly on the community team. And then we have our kind of third division is meta-science. So we study the science of science to try to understand what best practices lead to reproducibility. So our two major meta-science projects are in psychology and cancer biology, and looking at reproducing experiments and what practices lead to greater reproducibility. So those are the three main areas that we work in. But I think what you're most interested in is our infrastructure team and what they're up to. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show you what is the Open Science Framework. So this is our flagship product at the center, and it is a free open source tool that anyone can use. It's at osf.io. You can go there now and create an account. All you need is a name and an email address. And it is designed to be a completely domain agnostic tool. So any researchers doing any type of research would be able to use this tool. And the idea is to support the entire research workflow, from developing your idea to formulating your hypothesis developing your research plan, through to collecting your data, storing your data, and then enhancing its discoverability. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in right now and show you kind of some of the features of the system, and please feel free to interrupt whenever you have any questions or want me to elaborate on something. So this is what you see when you log in. This is your project dashboard. Everything on the OSF is organized into projects. So that might be a research project. It might be, you might be a lab group that has an overarching project, and then you want to divide it up into components among different lab groups. But the project is kind of the largest categorization that you can use on the OSF. So I'm going to pull up a project that I've already got made. That'll be a little quicker. So this is a project on the OSF. And you can see the title of the project at the top. You'll also see contributors at the top. So if you've got a whole lot of contributors, you can add them under the sharing tab. You can control what types of permissions people have to your project. So an admin or a read write or a read permission, depending on what level of permissions you want those people to have. So you can add in all of your collaborators. It's usually one of the first things people do. And then you can also break out your research. You have an overarching project, but you might have some individual various pieces of your research that you want to categorize separately. So you could build components and nest components into your project, as I've done here. And what's nice about doing this type of structure, nesting components, is that you can individually control who has access to these components. So as you'll see up here, at the top of the project, your project can be private or it can be public. So if you make it public, everyone can access it. Anybody in the world could see it. But you can control access to your components independently of that. So you might have some sensitive data that you can't share for some reason, or data that you're just not ready to share yet. And you can keep that in a separate component that has its own privacy permissions. The components also have different contributors than the overall project. So maybe you have some contributors that only need access to certain components, and you can really fine-tune that on the OSF. Every project also it has a wiki. So in this case, there's no wiki, but you can use the wiki to describe your project in more detail, and this is sometimes useful if you are going to make your project public and you want to share greater detail about your project with people. You can do that in the wiki, or if you're going to use it privately, but you can use the wiki to communicate different information to your collaborators. So people like to use the wiki for that. You'll also notice file storage on the OSF. You can store any file type on the OSF for sharing. There's no restriction on file type. There is a restriction on file size. Individual file size is restricted to 128 megabytes, but if you have a larger file or you have other needs, there are some other ways to work around that. And one of the ways that you can try to work around that is to install some storage add-ons, which you'll see listed here is one for Dropbox. We also connect to Google Drive. The idea here is that researchers have tools that they already use, and those tools are doing the job very effectively. And we don't want to tell a researcher, you know, you have to stop using that because now you're going to use the OSF. We want to meet people where they are. We want to lower the barrier to entry to some of these more transparent practices, and we try to do that by connecting the things that they already use. for one, and also the thing about connecting things that they're already using. These tools work very well. They're already serving a purpose, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So what we do is leverage an API connection. So you can see our storage add-ons right now are Amazon S3, Box, Dataverse, Dropbox, GitHub, Google Drive, and then we also connect to Figshare. So most of the connections now are storage add-ons with kind of commercial services. Places we're headed with this are to connect to data repositories that will help people enhance the discoverability of the research. There are lots of repositories out there for very specific data sets, and they're very useful to researchers. And we want to encourage people to contribute to those repositories. So we're working toward connecting to these other services via API. So I talked about meeting people where they are. This is kind of another big part of our strategy with the OSF. That's part of the reason for all the fine-grained controls over public and private workflows. A lot of people aren't ready to share all of their data and everything they do with the public immediately. So you can use the system completely privately forever if you want to, or you can use the system privately until you're at a point in your research that you're ready to share everything. Another great feature, another piece of meeting people where they are, is that version control is handled automatically in the OSF, and I don't know if I have a really good example of this on this project immediately, but so version control is handled really easily. You don't have to learn Git. You don't have to you don't have to learn how to use Git. You don't have to learn how to use version control systems. It's handled automatically. Anytime you would update a file, this is a poor example because it's not going to show you. Find a better one. Anytime you upload a new version of a file to the OSF, as long as it has the same name as the original file, it will get replaced with a new file. So here's one I've been working on. And you can see here's version 1 of the file. You click on it, it will pull up version 1 of the file right there. You want to see the most current version of the file, that's version 2, and there it is. And all I did was upload that file. So this works for any file type that you upload to the OSF. It's just really good practice when you're doing research, and you don't have to learn anything extra to do it. It just handles it for you, which is really nice. Another great feature, you'll see where these versions are, you can also see how many times a file has been downloaded. So if this is an incentive, right? People aren't necessarily ready to make all of their materials public, but if they get something out of it, if they can see who's downloading or how many people are downloading their materials, they might be incentivized to share more things. So keeping track of download statistics is one incentive. We also keep track of other statistics. Page views, for example, and referrer websites. How did people find your research? There's a visitor map. Where in the world are people coming from to see your work and build on your work? So that's rolled into the OSF. Along with that, some of you may be familiar with the idea of forks from open source software development. So we've employed the idea of forks into the OSF. So if you see some research that you think is really interesting and you want to build on it, you can fork that project, and it just creates a copy of everything that's in the original project into your project. And you can build on it and change things and grow the project from there. And it will always point back to the original project and say this project was forked from this other project, so it builds a functional network of citations on your work. So this is another incentive for people to open up their research. As far as discoverability on the OSF, there is we use Elasticsearch as our search feature. And so it searches through the titles and the descriptions and the wikis of all of your projects. And it also searches through tags, which are just free text. You can just type in whatever tags you want, and they will help aid discoverability. And then you can use these tags in your search to improve your results, your search results. I talked about working and having a download count, but another incentive for people to make their research public is that every project component and file on the OSF is assigned a unique persistent identifier. It's a 5-character string. I think you can see it on my screen here. It's up at the top, so the link to this project is osf.io/9f6gx, and that will never change. So we provide pre-formatted citations. If you were to look at this project and want to cite it, you could pick up your citation right here in the citation widget. So people can find your work, people can cite your work, and you'll always have a persistent identifier. If you have a data set and you're submitting to a journal and the journal requires you to have a DOI, you can also get a DOI for your work if the persistent identifier isn't enough for that. So, and along the idea of persistence and provenance of your research and your data, the OSF also keeps a log of recent activity. So everything that's been done to a project displays in this log here on the bottom. Every action. What am I missing? Commenting is another feature. It's not heavily used right now, although we're making some changes to it, so I think it will become more useful for people. So commenting is available. You can configure comments for your project. If it's a public project, you can decide if you only want contributors to be able to comment on a project, or if you want everyone in the world to be able to comment, everyone who's an OSF user to be able to comment on your project. And then we have a notification system, so you can receive email notifications every time you get a comment on your project, or you can get a daily digest to try to facilitate open collaboration. It's a nice feature. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Anything I can talk about that would be more useful?
I see a little tab at the top that says statistics.
Oh yeah, so that shows the number of visits and where your visitors are coming from. It's only for public resources. So I haven't talked about the tab next to that, which is registrations, actually. And I don't know how familiar any of you are with the concept of registrations. My background is chemical engineering, and this is not really something that was talked a lot about in that community, but the conversation about this is growing. So a registration is a time-stamped copy of your project, basically. And a lot of people use this as a way to register their hypothesis, or register their hypothesis, or register their analysis plan before they were to start some research. Or you could also use it if you were anytime you want a snapshot of your project at a given point in time, you could create a registration. So this is what a registration looks like. It's just a copy of your project in the current state that it's in. It's frozen. It can't be edited. And it gets its own unique identifier apart from the project. So you can keep editing your project, but you've got this copy. So if for some reason you're doing some work, you're collecting some data, and you've analyzed it in a certain way, and you would like to keep that analysis, keep a copy of everything in that current state, and then keep tinkering with it in your main project, you can do that. So that's what a registration is. And then we populate a registry on the OSF, anybody that's created a registration. Let's see what else. Anybody have any questions about, or any direction I could head toward, I guess?
Yeah, I have a question, Sarah.
Sure.
Peter, and that is, can you tell us about the use of this framework?
Sure.
Is it academic? Is it lots of different people? Where does the usage seem to occur?
Yeah, so it is right now mostly academic. So our founders are Brian Nosek and Jeff Spees. Brian is a psychology professor at the University of Virginia. He's right down the street from us. And Jeff was his PhD student. And the Open Science Framework was Jeff's dissertation, basically. And so by nature of Brian and Jeff, a lot of our users are psychologists, and a lot of them are in academic settings. We have built a platform to be discipline agnostic, basically. So we are actively engaging with groups outside of psychology and the behavioral social sciences. We have been gaining a fair amount of traction in the biological communities by nature of we have a reproducibility project in cancer biology. Although there's nothing to stop a group outside of academia from using the OSF, we don't have a whole lot of uptake outside of that. It's mostly academic research, although there's a fair number of people who use it to teach courses, use it as part of their, I guess, platform and document content management system kind of thing.
Sarah, could you talk to the kind of revolution you guys are trying to push along with this open science framework relative to how science is done currently, and what you think are there characteristics of science as it's done now that are holding us back? And
yeah, so this is the whole idea of sharing data and sharing your materials and sharing your science is that a lot of the research that's being done now is not shared, and so there's a lot of duplication of effort. I know from my PhD experience, I worked on something for 6 months. That didn't work, and then I'd go to a conference and talk to someone, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, we tried that too, and it didn't work, and I could have saved you some time." But nobody talks about that stuff, right? Only what makes it into a publication is what gets talked about. So there's the publication bias of only positive results make it into the literature, and if you are using something like the Open Science Framework to manage your research, even if you're not doing it publicly the whole time, if you are only going to open it up after your project is over, there's still value in that. It's discoverable now. Someone else can find it. And some other issues, data sharing. You read a publication, and there's a pretty graph in your publication, but the only thing that you know about that data set is what made the publication, those pretty data points that made that graph. You don't know about the data points that got thrown away, because they didn't fit as neatly as the other ones, or they just didn't work. So unless you have access to kind of some of the raw data and understand how people processed it, you don't really have the full research picture. So if they're using a tool like the Open Science Framework to share that data, you have access to a much greater depth of information. There's also the problem of, there are data sharing mandates for lots of journals require that if you publish your research in them and someone asks you for your data, you have to provide it. But the reality of it is that even if someone wanted to share their data, it might be on a hard drive somewhere, and maybe it was in a basement and the basement flooded, or there's a million different ways, or it was a grad student put it on a hard drive and the grad student has since left and now no one knows where it is, that kind of thing, which is very common. And it's not that people don't want to share their data, it's that there's not a technical solution to help them do it. So we are trying to approach this problem from building the technical solution, but also providing the training, which is why we do statistical and methodological training to help people do their analyses in a more reproducible and documented way. So we build the infrastructure, we build the training, and then we look for ways to incentivize the change in practice, because it can be extra work for you to document everything that you're doing and make all of your data available. So if a researcher has an incentive to do that, it would make a big difference.
Thank you. Thank you, that was great.
Sorry, I felt like I was rambling, but I could probably go on all day.
No, that was great, thank you.
Yeah, that was really helpful. That was a great question too, Abe. So you said you're the community's liaison or manager at this point. I'm wondering, and we're kind of, as a community, we're all really interested in soil science and agricultural science, and just wondering if perhaps you might be able to speak, or if you have questions even for us about how, as a research community, we might be able to use this tool in particular.
Yeah, I mean, what I want to know from different research communities that I talk to is always, where are your needs? What need do you have that there isn't a solution for? And kind of how can we help with that, basically. The platform itself is agnostic, but we recognize that there are probably tools that you use that are specific to your discipline that you would really like to see integrated or connected to in some way. So feedback on that type of thing is also always welcome.
Yep. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the API for doing that. We had 2 weeks ago, for example, we had PhotoSync on, and a lot of their tools that they're working on, independent of the devices in the field, are online display of data, as well as moving towards statistical analysis tools through, I think they're using embedded R. But is that sort of, maybe use that as an example for how we might proceed with a tool like that, and how the API would fit.
Okay. Yeah. So our public API is slated to be finished in the next 2 weeks, which will likely happen. I think I'm at a loss to really answer your question.
That was a tough one, Doris.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
When you say online,
well, that's what we're here to do, is figure it out.
True.
So when you say online display of data, you mean some like data visualization?
Data visualization, right. So yeah. They're working on some data visualization tools. So not only they're collecting the data, and so it's not just in a repository, but it's accessible.
Yeah.
And then going to the next stage to do some analytic tools. And a lot of what we've been also talking about is then linking some of that back to decision support and so forth. So we're going through many layers and many audiences, and so I think that's a large task of this group, is to sort of identify the different players and the tools associated with them, but then allow that data to flow through these different tools. And I really, I see this as an interdisciplinary sort of project management on the academic piece, but at some point we also need to pull it back into, say, our soil health analysis tools or environmental monitoring, that then becomes fed back to decision support tools.
Right. Right. That's a great question. So you're doing your statistical analysis in one tool, and then you're visualizing it all. I guess how are you collecting the data?
So, well, in the example of PhotoSync, they've got a device in the field that's being uploaded through mobile phones to their database, which then they're able to connect to. But part of this discussion is it won't be just limited to their devices,
Right.
because they're all also open source. So one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is then taking that data, using some of that framework, and being able to add additional data that might be coming from our FarmOS platform, which has management data, crop yields, starting to build a larger data set.
So if individual researchers were using other tools to collect the data, put it in whatever they're using, maybe they're using the OSF, and then connect that API into PhotoSync to push that data into
Right.
one place. Yeah. That's a possibility. That way, just to be able to push the data into a repository like we would with anything else. We are working on, and I don't know the status of this at all, but we are working on connecting to some R packages and R libraries for statistical analysis that could be done possibly from right within the OSF. I guess the benefit of using the OSF to collect and organize your data and then push into your database or the other databases would be if you had more materials that you wanted to build out around that data. You would be able to. You'd have that added layer of functionality.
Right. I mean, I can very much see the value of that of the project concept and being able to pull those different data sets in meaningfully together in one place and show that this is what this is what we're interested in with these multiple different data feeds. I guess that sort of leads to another question I had, which was around tagging and search. We didn't sort of jump into that, but it seems like looking at some of the getting some standardization on that process and ontologies and so forth.
Yeah.
So maybe you could.
Yeah, so right now tagging is entirely manual. You type in the tags, but we've had a couple, I've gotten a couple requests just in the last month about being able to upload like ontologies or having maybe select like suggested terms. So I could see that being something that we would add in the future. Is there a designated ontology for like a soil science? Is there like I don't want to say authoritative, but I think you know what I mean. An ontology that would be easy for us to loop into.
Can you specify a little bit more by what you mean by ontology? Or I know it's a little less standardized of a field than a lot of others, which is sometimes a limitation, really.
Oh, okay. So
I would say that there's probably not an ontology, a widely accepted ontology for soil science or agriculture or any of the stuff we're dealing with.
Yeah, I think that's one of the needs, or through the kinds of collaborations that we're talking about, is to help develop some of that. I've mentioned to this group on previous calls the projects through the Northeast Sustainable Ag Working Group to do just that, and linking that in with food systems science and so forth. So developing multiple organizational data federations to standardize and agree on some of those terms. And also more sort of structured taxonomies to help develop and bring new terms in context. But that's getting beyond the scope of this call. But I agree with Peter. I think it's a real need, and it's something that, yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily a need. I'm just pointing out that it's probably a good thing in some ways that there isn't. Because standards committees are set up usually to stop change. Anyway.
Interesting. It's that constant tension, right? The two different freedoms.
Yeah.
I have a question for Sarah that maybe is a little bit different, and that is that does OSF, do you see examples where people are finding collaboration or finding collaborators and networking their projects to wider audiences or to different groups or whatever?
Yeah, there are some use cases. There's a project that just started up a couple of weeks ago where someone has an idea for a project but needs collaborators, and so they were emailing with me to try to figure out how to structure things. But they've set up, his idea is he's going to set up an entire open project and just put it on the OSF and look for people to join up, and he's put instructions on how to join the project. So that's one use case. Talking with Dorn, I guess, before this call started, there is a group that's working here just for the summer, 3 PhD students who have a project called the Many Lab, and they basically set up one experiment and try to get as many collaborative groups around the world as they can. So there have been 3 of these projects now, and they've had 30 or 40 different lab groups participate in each of them. They basically just do the same experiment around the world and compare their results. So they're using the OSF to facilitate that, and they're also developing, what they're doing over the summer is developing this as kind of a mini lab in a box, so that they have obviously gained a lot of knowledge about how to do these types of experiments, or how to set up this type of collaborative experience. So they're kind of setting up the process so that someone else could take it and do it in whatever discipline they wanted to. So while that's not off the ground yet, it's coming, which is great. I don't think I know of any other examples from that. One other thing I'd like to point out, though, is that we do have we call it the presentation sharing service, although now we're rebranding it OSF for Meetings. It's basically a way for people who go to conferences to be able to post their slides or their poster on a list of all of the other talks and posters from their conference, and I have some anecdotal evidence that this has worked out really well in terms of finding collaborations. So I'm going to just share this right now. This is what it looks like. So you see, you can't look at all the posters at a conference, but if they happen to upload it to this site, then you can find the poster and possibly develop collaborations from this. And people have found this really valuable, which I think is really interesting. So this is what it looks like for a given site. It's just a list of all of the texts. And again, you get the download count and that type of information. But collaborations have grown out of that as well. So I think that's an interesting use case.
Well, thanks. That is interesting.
I'm going to circle back a little bit back to the tagging thing. One potential use that popped out to me is if enough people began to use this, one kind of big barrier in soil science in general is there are a lot of different methods and a lot of different opinions on what are the best methods, and not necessarily a lot of good papers or studies that kind of compare them and talk about how they kind of relate to each other, in particular things like pools of soil carbon. and it would be really interesting if there were a way to kind of tag projects or data sets with a particular method and almost kind of tag it with the instructions with that really specific protocol, so you can try and match your data against somebody else's and begin to compare. Especially since one big thing that kind of mediates soil processes is sort of geography and soil type that you're sampling from, things like that. So being able to compare methods across those types of geographies would be really powerful and interesting, but is right now a pain in the ass to do unless you're willing to track down people who've used it by looking through their publications and requesting data from them individually.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. I guess what I'm stuck on is how you get people to put that metadata on there, right? Like that's the piece. We talk with a lot of librarians because when you're talking about data sharing and storage, that's really your best resource. And I feel like it always comes down to that. How do you encourage people to attach the right metadata? And I just haven't figured out what the answer to that is. But
I wonder, have you been with with other folks who are using it currently? Is that a barrier? Are people unwilling to put up the metadata? Is it just too much of a step? I think one way I could think of trying to reduce the barrier for that would be to sort of give people preset options. Like at least in soil science, there's a handful of publications, that are sort of the seminal ones that, their site count is massive because they're the one who developed this method.
Right.
So if there's a way to kind of tag it with that particular citation, and that's sort of a common language that everybody has.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting conversation that's been going on also is around the grant application process, which is often online. So if we're able to insert in that application process some of the approaches, the methods, the problem statement, both in free text as well as free text search as well as tagged, that data, that a lot of that sort of that approach data that you're mentioning, Dan, would be there. And there's an incentive because it's part of what the funders also want to look at as well as it's going on, and linking that to previous work. So I could see an opportunity there at the very beginning part of the process, or in the application process, for tagging some of that.
Yeah. And I'm going to share my screen again. Another thing that I didn't point out, I think, earlier was if you are using, so I mean, part of our whole vision for this, right, is to capture every part of the research workflow. So if you were to use the OSF to write a grant application, which is, an option, or you were just using it to collect materials and you wanted to share things, but you don't want to make you don't want to make your, you don't make your grant application publicly available, right? But you want to be able to easily share some pilot data or something that you've collected. Instead of just sharing it publicly, you can create a view-only link. And there have been some people that have done this in grant applications. So you just go to sharing and you go under view-only link, and you can pick out which parts of your project you want to share. Send that link. Anybody that has the link has read access to the project, but that's it. And so maybe you submit that, you hear back from your grant proposal, and then you want to get rid of that link later. You want to restrict access to that. You can delete it. But that's also useful for submitting for publications. You want to give your peer reviewers access to your peer reviewers access to your data, but not the whole world until you're done publishing or you've been accepted. So that's something. And along with the grant process, you're using the OSF to write your grant. Eventually, where we'd like to be able to get to is via the API connection, just to be able for you to submit your grant or submit your publication right from the OSF. And you know, it's down the road, but that is kind of where we see it going.
Could you talk a little bit about the search process and for previous or related works and how you would just maybe just walk through a little bit of a case?
For search on the OSF?
Yeah, using OSF.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, let me jump back here. So we use Elasticsearch for our search. There is Lucene search syntax, so that you can search through very specific, search for very specific instances of things. So maybe you're looking for, there was one. So you can search for your term and then go through everything that comes back. You can look at just projects, just components, so sub-projects, or you can search through the registry. Another thing that you can search is what's called SHARE, and SHARE is Shared Access Research Ecosystem, and it's a partnership through the Association of Research Libraries, and we are the technical partner on the SHARE project. And what this displays is research release events. These are not things that are stored on the OSF. These are things that have been deposited in one of the 38 content providers that we now connect to, and these are things like Archive, Figshare, PubMed Central, in some institutional repositories, the MIT Institutional Repository, PLOS, which is an open access journal. So anytime a research release event happens, which could be a data set being published somewhere, a dissertation being deposited in an institutional repository, a figure going up on Figshare, SHARE goes out and collects all of this metadata about these events, normalizes it to one standard schema, and then broadcasts that back out. So you can go to the osf.io/share, and search for SHARE. Search SHARE for whatever you want. You can set up an Atom feed and bring it into an RSS reader if you want to do that. But those are things that appear when you search on the OSF, so you're not just searching the OSF. I don't know if that actually answered your question or not.
No, that's helpful.
So yeah, so you're searching the OSF, you're searching through project title, description, the wiki. You're not searching within files yet. That's coming, but you're not searching that now. But then you're also searching all of these other content providers, and then that links out to their repository or journal or whatever.
And do you have sort of a concept? Maybe you could give us an idea of some of the other collaborators and sort of how, whether there's sort of the kind of homepage or sort of open ways in which you allow folks to sort of present their own work on their own page or so forth. I mean, maybe just talk a little bit about how folks collaborate with you and promote their work through the site.
Sure. So let me pull up. Try and think of a good example here. So here is the. Nope, that's not it. Here we go. So let me show you how the Many Labs group has done this. So here's how the Many Labs group functions. This is a big collaborative project. You can see the, 100 contributors or so on this project. So they are just using the OSF to do their own work. And then all of the individual teams have their kind of own fork of the project. I guess that is not a great example here. Let me show you RPP. So that was how the Many Labs group was using it. RPP is kind of an internal project, but not exactly, because we coordinated it, but all of the contributors on the project, of which there are 270, basically self-selected to be involved in the project. So RPP has one main overarching project, and then every individual study, there were 100 studies that were replicated. Every study has its own component. So they're using the OSF, these individual researchers are using the OSF to do their own research. It's all linked under one overarching project. So you could set up an overarching project and then have people make components for their own projects, or you could link to a project if you just want to show that they're connected, but not necessarily nest them. That's how this group does it.
So the primary organizing principle is really project rather than, and then individual. There, not so much organization.
Right. So
yeah.
Right now that is true. We're talking about developing, and maybe this would be a good discussion to have here as well. We're talking about creating different views of the OSF. So I showed you OSF, the OSF for meetings, OSF presentation service. But we're talking about having maybe some sort of like an institutional view. So it would be like that. Like you would go and look at, I pulled up the SBSB 2015 conference, and you'd see all of the presentations listed. We're talking about creating like an institutional view, or even from some groups who are looking for a back end for a journal that might not want to invest in some serious journal software. You might set up a view for that. So what we are thinking is, like the presentation service, have a view and then a list of the projects that fall under it. Is that the type of view?
That's, I think, exactly what I was trying to get at. So, for example, there's a tremendous amount of content, but a smaller group of individuals may want to. It's kind of the tagging question also to get to that view. Is that it's this set of projects that are applicable to this group, and the participants within that group are sort of are editing and sifting through to sort of aggregate relevant content for their project. It's beyond a project. It's sort of the meta project, or the aggregation of a number of projects that's meaningful. So I mean, I think about this group, for example, as an example, that we may have our own projects, but we'll be interested in what everybody else is doing, and then we want to be looking at where those are overlapping. And we may individually pull in additional content as well, but there's some way in which to view that sort of aggregation from an.
So, sorry, would you envision then some sort of like you would create a group, and the group everyone in the group would be able to log in and see like an admin panel of everything that's in that group, that maybe would be public to the group but not public to everyone?
Well, kind of what we're doing, we're working through this on with our farm hack concept too, where essentially of the concept of organization, and individuals have an attribution that they're associated with particular organizations, and organizations have lists of individuals. So basically, once you log in and you say we're part of these project or this organization, all of your associated projects, conversations, etc., flow together. So you have your customized view of the activity within that within the database.
Right.
So
So you
I think,
would
yeah.
be wanting to be able to see things that, I have a project and it falls under this organization, and I want to be able to share that with anyone in the organization, but I don't want to share that with the world, right? It's like kind of an intermediate.
Or even if you do, there's value in aggregating it so that you can see it, so other people don't have to go through the same search process.
Right.
Even if it's publicly accessible, there's a lot of work in just in combing through and going through searches and finding that this content is relevant.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that fits in line well with the presentation service model.
Right.
That's easy. The adding another layer and like an admin view, that's another step. But populating institutional views, to organization list, whatever, that would be easy. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I have one more question, but I want to make sure if anybody else has any questions, if Abe, Dan, Peter, if you guys have any more. If not, I'll forge ahead, I guess.
I don't really have a question, but I want to thank Sarah for her time and effort, and this has been really interesting for me, and I'm intrigued by the Science Foundation.
Great. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. Please go and check out the OSF, and if you have any questions, send me an email or help desk as well. It's contact at OSF.
Thanks. I've been looking at it a little bit online as we talk. So.
Abe or Dan, do you guys have questions there?
No, I'm good. I just want to thank Sarah as well. It's been interesting.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, that was great. Appreciate it a lot.
Thanks.
Great. Well, I just wanted to get one last question, I think. I think we started a little late, so hopefully we're not running too long. But I, just from experience in the field, I know there's a lot of long-term experiments that have been set up where they kind of are testing crop rotations or long-term management strategies and their effects on term and stuff like that. And I think that those would be great use cases for the OSF. And I wonder, I just think administered and how they're managed, and that it would be hard to identify a particular person who would be able to kind of take the big amount of data that they have that's sort of managed by a lot of different people and integrate it into something like OSF. And I wonder if perhaps is part of your strategy to have staff people, and maybe this is kind of what your job is, but staff people are kind of almost individual folks who can either, if that data is already out there, take it and integrate it into the OSF framework, or help those researchers kind of step by step do it, to kind of almost go out and get them to do it if they wouldn't have thought to do it themselves.
Yeah, it's not part of our strategy right now in terms of going out and getting them to do it. It's not part of our strategy. We do provide support and assistance to people who are trying to do this, but need some technical guidance. That reproducibility project in psychology that I showed you that had 270 contributors, the project coordinators who worked on that are experts in managing large research projects and large amounts of data. So we have a lot of the experience in kind of how to approach those things. We can provide assistance and guidance. But that's kind of where we are right now. I haven't had that question before, actually. Yeah, that's where we are right now. Definitely willing to help, but not something we're attacking at this time.
Great.
Something else that I did not say that probably should have been the first thing that I said, that your question reminds me of. I get the question a lot: is how you're funded and how do we know that you're going to be around for more than the next 6 months? So we're primarily foundation funded. Our major donors are the Laura and John Arnold Foundation. We also have money from Templeton, an anonymous donor. We have some NIH funding right now. So we're fully funded for the next 5 years. And the OSF, as far as the OSF and the things that are stored on it, we do have a preservation fund in place so that everything that's stored on the OSF can remain publicly available in perpetuity. Basically, if we were to go out of business 5 years from now, everything that's stored there will persist because of the preservation fund. Yeah, basically the OSF would go into kind of a read-only mode, but we've covered that possibility, and the benefit of it being an open source tool is that anyone could then pick it up and carry on if that was of interest.
Great.
Great. Well, I think with that, we're just at time. So thank you, Sarah, very much. That was really interesting. And yeah, I'm sure, hopefully, if folks have questions, we will put her contact information with the video that comes out of this. And yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, that would be great. It was nice talking with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Good day.
Cheers.
Have a good day.
Good.